By 1878, the Kiowa, once 3,000 strong, were reduced to under 1,000, their lands stolen, their bison herds decimated from millions to mere hundreds. In Huntsville Penitentiary, a Kiowa warrior dressed in frayed prison stripes stood at a second-story window, his weathered hands clutching the frame as he sang a death song that silenced the guards. Satanta, the Great Orator who led 100 battles, was now convict number 2107, condemned by a trial historian Charles Robinson III deemed a travesty of justice. Did he jump to seize eternal freedom, or was he pushed to extinguish his unyielding spirit? What drove a fearless leader to such a desperate act? Around 1815, a boy named Satanta, meaning white bear, was born into the Kiowa Nation, a people of the southern plains renowned for their horsemanship and martial prowess. The name Satanta, a distortion by white settlers, would later echo across battlefields and courtrooms. Historical records, sparse as they are, place his birth in present-day Kansas or Oklahoma, where the Kiowa numbered approximately 3,000 at their peak in the early 19th century. Satanta grew among a people who followed vast bison herds, their culture woven into the rhythms of the grasslands. His name, tied to the sacred bear, marked him for leadership, as bears symbolized strength and resilience in Kiowa cosmology. Historian Charles Robinson III notes in his book Satanta, the life and death of a war chief, that Satanta's early years shaped a warrior who would defy empires. On the 11th of October, 1878, Satanta's life ended in a chilling act at Huntsville State Penitentiary in Texas. Official reports state that he leapt from a second-story window in the prison hospital, a fall that killed him instantly. He was 63 years old, a man who had once led war parties against armies but now bore the weight of captivity. The prison, built in 1849, held over 2,000 inmates by the 1870s, many subjected to brutal labor and meager rations. Historian Clarence Wharton, in his History of Texas, describes the penitentiary as a wretched swamp where hope withered. Satanta's death was recorded as suicide, yet whispers of foul play persist, as we will explore later. His final act, whether chosen or imposed, closed a chapter of Kiowa resistance. As convict number 2107, Satanta devised an escape plan in the fall of 1878, one he believed could not fail. The Huntsville Penitentiary's walls, some 30 feet high and reinforced with brick, loomed as a formidable barrier. Guards, armed with rifles and patrolling in shifts, numbered at least 50 for the prison's population. Yet Satanta, whose life had been a series of calculated risks, was undeterred. Robinson's biography recounts that Satanta's resolve stemmed from his identity as a warrior. Captivity was an affront to his very being. The plan's details remain unknown, lost to history, but its audacity reflects a man who had once outwitted military commanders. His determination was a silent rebuke to the system that sought to break him. A previous escape attempt, likely in the early years of his imprisonment, had failed, leaving Satanta more resolute. Historical accounts from the Texas State Archives suggest that escape attempts at Huntsville were rare, with only 12 recorded successes between 1849 and 1878, due to the prison's stringent security. Satanta's earlier failure, possibly thwarted by betrayal or miscalculation, taught him the cost of error. Now, facing a life sentence and the specter of vengeance from fellow inmates, he refused to let high walls or watchful eyes deter him. The distance to his homeland, over 500 miles to the Kiowa lands in Oklahoma, was daunting, yet his spirit burned for freedom. Wharton notes that Satanta's defiance grew fiercer in captivity, a fire unquenched by chains. In the prison's grim confines, Satanta wore the tattered stripes of a convict, a stark contrast to the painted war regalia of his youth. The prosecutor at his 1871 murder trial, as quoted in court records, described him as disrobed of all fancy graces, exposed in the light of reality. His once powerful frame, over 6 feet tall, was gaunt from malnutrition. Prison rations, often moldy bread and thin gruel, provided barely 1,200 calories daily, half the needs of a grown man. Robinson argues that this degradation was deliberate, a tactic to strip native prisoners of dignity. Satanta's appearance, marked by scars from battles and a single scalp lock adorned with an eagle feather, still commanded attention, but it was a shadow of the warrior who once rode fearlessly. Satanta's reputation as a formidable leader preceded him, earning him the label Archfiend of Treachery and Blood from Texas newspapers in the 1870s. This notoriety drew stares from other inmates, a mix of curiosity and contempt. The prison housed over 200 native prisoners by 1878, but few were Kiowa, leaving Satanta isolated among strangers. Historical sociologist John Crank, in his study of 19th-century prisons, notes that native inmates faced unique hostility, often targeted as outsiders. Satanta's role in deadly raids, including the 1871 Warren Wagon Train attack that killed 7 Teamsters, made him infamous. The weight of his past deeds hung heavy, a constant reminder of the blood he had spilled. Despite sharing the same cells, Satanta viewed his fellow inmates as enemies, a sentiment they reciprocated. He met their glares with unflinching resolve, his dark eyes burning with defiance. Robinson's research highlights that Satanta's hostility was rooted in cultural loyalty. To him, non-Kiowa prisoners, especially those tied to settler communities, were extensions of the forces that stole his people's lands. The Kiowa, reduced to under 1,000 by 1878 due to disease and warfare, clung fiercely to their identity. Satanta's isolation was not just physical but spiritual, a warrior trapped among those who could never understand his world. His vigilance was constant as he anticipated an attack. Satanta's fear of retribution was well-founded. He believed that among the prisoners were kin of his victims, men whose families had fallen to his war parties. The Warren Wagon Train attack alone left 7 dead and sparked outrage across Texas, with newspapers like the Galveston Daily News calling for his execution. Robinson estimates that Satanta's raids over 2 decades may have claimed dozens of lives, a toll that ensured enemies even in prison. The Texas prison system, as Crank notes, was a melting pot of grudges, where personal vendettas often erupted in violence. Satanta's certainty that someone would seek revenge was not paranoia but a grim reality, sharpening his urgency to escape. Vengeance was not foreign to Satanta. It was the very force that led to his imprisonment. In 1871, he was convicted of murder, following the Warren Wagon Train attack, a raid driven by retaliation against settler encroachment. Court records from Fort Sill reveal that Satanta admitted to leading the assault, viewing it as justice for Kiowa losses. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen, in The Comanche Empire, argues that such raids were strategic, aimed at disrupting settler economies. Satanta's trial, the first to treat a native leader as a criminal rather than a combatant, sentenced him to death, later commuted to life. His past, a cycle of retribution, now chained him to a cell. Gazing north from his cell, Satanta's eyes traced the horizon, seeking the open prairies of his youth. The Huntsville Penitentiary, surrounded by dense pines and stifling humidity, was a world apart from the Kiowa's grasslands, where bison once numbered 30 million before hide hunters reduced them to fewer than 1.00 by 1878. Wharton describes Satanta standing for hours at the bars, his gaze fixed on the north, where his people still clung to a shrinking homeland. The contrast was stark, the free winds of the plains versus the dank air of confinement. His memories of a boundless world fueled his longing, a silent vow to return or die trying. Satanta's memories carried him back to a childhood among the Kiowa, a time unmarred by the encroachments of settler society. Before the 1830s, the Kiowa roamed freely across the southern plains, their territory spanning 100,000 square miles from present-day Kansas to Texas. No railroads, which, by 1878, crisscrossed 93,000 miles of American soil, nor barbed wire fences, first patented in 1874, confined their movements. The bison, numbering 30 million in 1800, sustained them, untouched by the hide hunters who would slaughter all but 1,000 by Satanta's final years. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen, in the Comanche Empire, describes the Kiowa's world as one of fluid sovereignty, where freedom was not an ideal but a lived reality. Satanta's youth, filled with the songs of his people and the thunder of hooves, stood in stark contrast to the prison's oppressive silence. In his cell, Satanta felt a quiet pity for his captors, men he saw as shackled by their own rigid society. White settlers, bound by laws and labor, lived in towns like Galveston, which by 1870 housed 13,000 souls in grid-like confinement. Their world, to Satanta, was one of unnatural restraint, far from the open plains where a Kiowa warrior could ride 50 miles in a day. Historian Charles Robinson III notes in Satanta the life and death of a war chief, that Satanta viewed European, American culture as stifling, a system that crushed the spirit under the weight of conformity. His captors, clad in stiff uniforms and tethered to schedules, could never know the exhilaration of a dawn raid or the solace of a starlit camp. This pity, though, did not soften his resolve. It sharpened his contempt for their chains. The memory of his first battle alongside his father flooded Satanta's mind. A moment of pride etched into his being. Likely in the 1830s, when he was a teenager, he joined a war party against the Pawnee, a rival tribe with whom the Kiowa clashed over hunting grounds. Kiowa oral histories, preserved in the Oklahoma Historical Society, recount that such raids involved 50 to 100 warriors, striking with precision and retreating swiftly. Satanta, wielding a lance and shield, earned his place among men. Years later, he led his own son into battle, a rite of passage that bound generations. Robinson emphasizes that these moments defined Satanta's identity as a leader, his pride, rooted in a lineage of courage that no prison could erase. A vivid triumph lingered in Satanta's thoughts, the 1864 First Battle of Adobe Walls, where he helped rout Kit Carson and 335 New Mexican troops. The Kiowa, alongside Comanche allies, numbered over 1,000, surrounding the Adobe trading post in Texas. Carson's force, equipped with 2 howitzers, faced relentless assaults. Satanta, then a sub-chief, orchestrated a feigned retreat, luring the troops into open ground where Kiowa archers struck. Military reports, cited in David Levere's The Texas Indians, confirm Carson's men fled, abandoning supplies and burning their wagons. The victory, costing the Kiowa fewer than 20 lives, was a testament to Satanta's tactical genius, a memory that burned bright in his darkened cell. During that battle, Satanta's cunning shone when he seized a soldier's trumpet and used it to sow chaos. By mimicking U.S. Army signals, he sent false commands. A charge when Carson ordered retreat, a halt when pursuit was needed. The confusion, as noted in Colonel Carson's own report, disrupted the troops' cohesion, contributing to their defeat. Historical archaeologist Donna Roper, in her analysis of Adobe Walls artifacts, confirms the presence of a bugle among recovered items, likely Satanta's tool of deception. This act was not mere trickery but a masterful exploitation of the enemy's reliance on rigid protocols, turning their own technology against them. Yet Satanta scorned the trumpet's harsh blare, finding it a poor echo of the Kiowa's music. The Kiowa's songs, performed with drums and flutes, carried spiritual weight, marking ceremonies and battles. Ethnomusicologist Victoria Levine, in writing American Indian music, describes Kiowa melodies as intricate, with rhythms tied to the heartbeat of the plains. In contrast, the trumpet's metallic wail, used by armies to marshal troops, grated on Satanta's ears. In prison, where silence was broken only by clanging bars, he likely yearned for the resonant chants of his people, a sound that once rallied warriors and soothed souls. Back from raids, Satanta was celebrated by the women of his village, their praise affirming his valor. Kiowa women, who numbered half of the tribe's 3,000 in the 1830s, played vital roles, preparing food and crafting goods, but also honoring warriors with songs and dances. Oral traditions, recorded by anthropologist Alice Marriott, recount how young women greeted returning fighters, offering admiration that reinforced a man's status. For Satanta, whose raids brought horses and goods, these moments were a pinnacle of manhood. In Huntsville, where he faced only hostility, the memory of such warmth was a bittersweet refuge. The Kiowa's prosperity, built on abundant game, stood in stark contrast to prison fare. Before 1870, the plains teemed with 15 million bison, 2 million elk, and countless pronghorn, providing the Kiowa with meat, hides, and tools. A single bison, yielding 400 pounds of meat, could feed a family for months. In Huntsville, prisoners received gruel and stale bread, often infested with weevils, totaling under 1,200 calories daily. Historian John Crank, in his study of 19th-century prisons, notes that malnutrition was rampant, weakening inmates like Satanta. The memory of feasts, shared under open skies, underscored the indignity of his confinement. Satanta rejected the prison's food, choosing hunger over submission. By 1878, he was emaciated, his weight likely dropping below 150 pounds from a once robust 200. Clarence Wharton, in History of Texas, writes that Satanta's refusal to eat was a deliberate act, a warrior's stand against degradation. This choice echoed Kiowa traditions of fasting for spiritual strength, as during the sun dance, which Satanta endured to earn his sacred shield. In prison, starvation was his final rebellion, a refusal to let his captors claim even his sustenance. His body weakened, but his spirit remained unbroken. Staring at a small bird perched on his cell's windowsill, Satanta longed to soar like an eagle to his homeland. Eagles, revered in Kiowa culture as messengers to the Creator, symbolized freedom and vision. The Oklahoma Plains, 500 miles north, were home to 10,000 eagles in the 19th century, a number now dwindled to 2,000. Robinson suggests that Satanta's fixation on the bird reflected a spiritual yearning, a desire to transcend the bars that caged him. In his mind, the eagle's flight traced a path back to the Kiowa, a journey his body could no longer make but his soul still sought. Unable to take flight like the eagle he envied, Satanta found his only path to freedom in a fatal leap from a prison window, or so the official record claims. On the 11th of October, 1878, at Huntsville State Penitentiary, he fell from the second-story hospital ward, a drop of 20 feet onto hard ground. The Texas prison system, housing 2,000 inmates in 1878, was notorious for its lethality. Over 100 prisoners died that decade from disease, labor accidents, or violence. Historian Charles Robinson III in Satanta, The Life and Death of a War Chief, argues that Satanta's act was a warrior's final defiance, choosing death over subjugation. Yet doubts linger, as some records hint at foul play, a possibility that casts a shadow over the official narrative. The guards, stationed in pairs along Huntsville's corridors, reported hearing Satanta's death song before the crash of glass. This haunting chant, a Kiowa tradition sung by warriors facing certain death, was a spiritual farewell, invoking ancestors and the Creator. Ethnomusicologist Victoria Levine notes that such songs, often lasting several minutes, were deeply personal, with rhythms echoing the warrior's heartbeat. At Huntsville, where silence was enforced by iron bars, the song's resonance unnerved the guards, numbering 50 for the prison's population. The sound, followed by the shattering window and a dull thud, marked Satanta's end, a moment Clarence Wharton describes in History of Texas as eerie and final. Satanta's voice, even in captivity, carried the power that earned him the title Great Orator. Fluent in 5 languages, including Kiowa, Comanche, and Cheyenne, but not English, he captivated audiences with his rhythmic cadence. In the 1860s, he spoke at councils with U.S. Coro officials, his words swaying even those who could not understand them. Military reports, preserved in the National Archives, note that Satanta's orations drew crowds of 200 or more at Fort Sill, where his gestures and tone conveyed authority. Robinson emphasizes that his linguistic skill, rare among Plains leaders, made him a diplomat as much as a warrior, bridging worlds until betrayal caged him. In the 1860s, U.S. Army officers, despite their conflicts with Satanta, admired his boldness and wit. Reports from Fort Dodge, cited in David Laverre's The Texas Indians, describe him as a favorite guest at officers' tables, where his humor disarmed even hardened soldiers. In one instance, he jested about outrunning cavalry horses, a quip that amused a gathering of 30 officers in 1867. Yet his defiance of white laws, which demanded Kiowa's submission to reservations, made him a paradox, charming yet dangerous. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen notes that such charisma masked Satanta's resolve to resist, a duality that frustrated his foes and endeared him to his people. Born around 1815 in what is now Kansas or Oklahoma, Satanta was shaped by the Kiowa's nomadic life, a culture centered on the pursuit of bison herds across 100,000 square miles. The Kiowa, numbering 3,000 in the early 19th century, lived in portable tipis, moving every few weeks to follow game. Their economy, as Hämäläinen details, relied on 15 million bison in 1800, providing meat, hides, and tools. Satanta, raised in this fluid world, learned to navigate vast landscapes, a skill that later baffled pursuing armies. His birthplace, likely near the Arkansas River, was a hub of Kiowa life, far from the prison's damp confines. From toddlerhood, Satanta mastered horsemanship, a cornerstone of Kiowa survival. By age 3, he rode ponies, and by 10, he handled full-sized horses, capable of galloping 30 miles daily. The Kiowa owned 10,000 horses in the 1830s, a wealth that fueled their raids and hunts. Anthropologist Alice Marriott, in her study The Kiowa, notes that boys trained relentlessly, learning to shoot arrows from horseback by age 12. Satanta's skill, honed through years of practice, made him a formidable warrior, able to strike and vanish before enemies could respond, a talent that defined his early battles. As a teenager in the 1830s, Satanta joined war parties against rivals like the Pawnee and Osage, later targeting Mexican, Texan, and American settlers. Kiowa raids, often involving 50 warriors, struck settlements along the Santa Fe Trail, seizing horses and goods. By 1850, Satanta led his own parties, attacking ranches in Texas, where settlers numbered 212,000. Laverre estimates that Kiowa raids killed 200 settlers between 1830 and 1870, a toll that fueled hatred against Satanta. His early battles, fought with lance and bow, were a rite of passage, forging a leader who thrived in conflict. Satanta carried a sacred sun shield into battle, its power earned through the grueling Sunday dance, a 4-day ritual of fasting and pain. The shield, made in 1795 and adorned with feathers, was one of 20 such relics among the Kiowa, each believed to protect its bearer. He painted his body red, a color symbolizing war and vitality, as noted by Marriott. In raids, he led 100 warriors, their faces also painted, creating a fearsome sight. The sun dance, endured by only 50 Kiowa men annually, marked Satanta as elite, his shield a testament to his spiritual and physical strength. In the First Battle of Adobe Walls in 1864, Satanta, as sub-chief, played a pivotal role in the Kiowa's victory. Leading 1,000 warriors alongside Comanche allies, he orchestrated the assault on Kit Carson's 335 troops. His use of a captured trumpet, as confirmed by archaeological finds, disrupted U.S. commands, sowing chaos. Carson's report, cited in Roper's studies, admits the defeat cost 60 men and all supplies. Satanta's leadership, blending strategy and audacity, made the battle a high point of Kiowa resistance, a memory he likely clung to in his final days. In 1869, Satanta surrendered to Colonel George Armstrong Custer at Fort Sill, a bitter necessity to secure his people's safety. The Kiowa, reduced to 1,800 by smallpox and warfare, faced starvation after bison declines. Custer, commanding 800 troops, held Satanta and another chief, Lone Wolf, as hostages for 3 months until the Kiowa agreed to a reservation. Robinson notes that Satanta's surrender, witnessed by 500 Kiowa, was a public humiliation, stripping him of autonomy. Yet his compliance bought time for his people, a sacrifice that underscored his role as both warrior and protector. The fragile peace of 1869 shattered in spring 1871, when Satanta led a series of raids across Texas, culminating in the attack on the Warren Wagon Train. On May 18, near Salt Creek Prairie, Satanta and 100 Kiowa and Comanche warriors ambushed a convoy of 12 wagons, killing 7 teamsters and seizing 41 mules. The attack, detailed in court records from Fort Sill, was a calculated strike against settler expansion, which had surged to 255,000 Texans by 1870. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen, in the Comanche Empire, notes that such raids aimed to disrupt supply lines, weakening the economic grip of settlers. Satanta's leadership, bold and precise, rekindled fear across the frontier, cementing his infamy among Texans. Arrested at Fort Sill in the 18th of June 71, Satanta became the first Native American tried in a civilian court as a criminal, not a combatant. The trial, held in Jacksboro, Texas, before a jury of 12 settlers, marked a shift in U.S. policy toward Native leaders. Satanta, bound in chains and clad in a breechcloth, faced charges of murder for the Warren attack. Court transcripts, preserved in the Texas State Archives, reveal he admitted his role, defending it as retribution for Kiowa losses. Historian Charles Robinson III in Satanta, The Life and Death of a War Chief, calls the trial a mockery, noting its lack of interpreters and biased jury. The verdict was swift, condemning Satanta to death. Sentenced to hang, Satanta's fate was altered when Governor Edmund Davis commuted his sentence to life imprisonment in 1871. Pressure from federal officials, wary of escalating Kiowa unrest, led to his transfer to Huntsville Penitentiary. By 1873, advocacy from Indian agents who reported 500 Kiowa warriors ready to raid prompted his parole to appease the tribe. Robinson argues this release was a pragmatic move, not mercy, as the U.S. sought to avoid a broader war. Satanta, now 58, returned to a reservation where 1,800 Kiowa Street struggled against starvation, their bison herds reduced to under 1,000 by 1873. During his parole, Satanta joined the Second Battle of Adobe Walls in the 18th of June 74, and the attack on Lyman's wagon train in September, though he claimed only an advisory role. At Adobe Walls, 700 Kiowa, Comanche, and Cheyenne warriors, led by Quanah Parker, assaulted 28 traders, losing 15 men to the defenders' rifles. Satanta, then 59, guided younger fighters. As noted in military reports from Fort Sill, the Lyman attack, targeting a 50-wagon supply train, cost 5 soldiers' lives. Historian David LaVere in the Texas Indians suggests Satanta's presence, even as a mentor, reignited his warrior spirit. His involvement, however, violated parole, sealing his fate. Recaptured in the 18th of October 74, Satanta was returned to Huntsville for life, his final days marked by unrelenting confinement. The penitentiary, with 2,000 inmates, subjected prisoners to chain gangs building railroads, a grueling task that killed 200 inmates from 1870 to 1878. Satanta, weakened by malnutrition and labor, faced a sentence with no hope of release. Clarence Wharton, in History of Texas, describes his cell as a dank tomb, where 30-foot walls and 50 guards ensured escape was a dream. His re-imprisonment, Robinson notes, was a deliberate act to break the Kiowa's resistance, targeting their most charismatic leader. Charles Robinson III argues that Satanta's alleged suicide on the 11th of October, 1878, was a warrior's refusal to submit to white authority. Leaping from a second-story window, Satanta denied his captors the victory of his obedience, a choice Robinson calls an honorable death in Kiowa tradition. The act, witnessed by 2 guards, followed a death song, a ritual affirming his identity. Kiowa oral histories, recorded by anthropologist Alice Marriott, emphasize that such acts were not despair but defiance, reclaiming agency in the face of erasure. Satanta's fall, 20 feet to the ground, ended a life that had defied empires. Clarence Wharton paints a different picture, portraying Satanta as a man broken by despair. In his final months, Satanta, gaunt and silent, stood for hours gazing north toward the Kiowa's Oklahoma homeland, 500 miles away. He refused prison food, his weight dropping below 150 pounds, a choice Wharton sees as surrender to hopelessness. Prison logs, cited in the Texas State Archives, confirm Satanta's withdrawal, noting he spoke to no one, his eyes fixed on a distant horizon. This image, of a warrior staring through bars, captures the toll of captivity on a man who once roamed boundless plains. Records indicate Satanta cut his wrists before his fatal leap, an act that landed him in the prison hospital. In the 18th of September 78, guards found him bleeding in his cell, his wounds severe enough to require medical care. The hospital, a cramped ward for 50 inmates, offered little beyond bandages and gruel. Robinson suggests this self-harm was a precursor to suicide, a deliberate step toward freedom through death. The act aligns with Kiowa practices of enduring pain for spiritual gain, as in the sun dance, which Satanta survived decades earlier. His wounds, though, weakened him further, setting the stage for his final act. Some historians and Kiowa descendants challenge the suicide narrative, suspecting Satanta was murdered. The prison, a volatile mix of 2,000 inmates, housed men whose families suffered in Kiowa raids. The Warren Wagon Train attack alone, killing 7 left widows and orphans who vilified Satanta. John Crank, in his study of 19th-century prisons, notes that Huntsville saw 30 inmate-on-inmate killings from 1870 to 1878, often driven by grudges. A guard or prisoner, motivated by personal loss, could have pushed Satanta, staging it as suicide. This theory, unproven, underscores the hostility he faced. Satank, a fellow Kiowa chief, offered a precedent for Satanta's defiance. In 1871, en route to trial in Texas, the 70-year-old Satanta gnawed his wrists to slip his chains, then attacked his escorts with a knife. He stabbed one guard and seized a rifle before being shot dead, his death song ringing out. Marriott's Kiowa oral histories recount Satanta's act as a model of resistance, costing 2 guards lives. Satanta, aware of his comrade's fate, may have drawn inspiration, choosing a similar path to deny his captors control. Satanta's story, known to 1,800 Kiowa, echoed in Satanta's final moments, a legacy of unyielding courage. Following his death on the 11th of October, 1878, Satanta was buried in an unmarked grave at Huntsville State Penitentiary, a final indignity for a Kiowa leader. The prison, holding 2,000 inmates, maintained a small cemetery where 500 bodies were interred by 1,900, many without ceremony. In 1963, Satanta's grandson, James Aukia, a renowned Kiowa artist, secured the exhumation of his remains. Ochaya, born in 1906, worked with the Kiowa Tribal Council to reinter Satanta at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, 500 miles from Huntsville. Historian Charles Robinson III in Satanta, The Life and Death of a War Chief, notes that this act restored honor to Satanta, reuniting him with the sacred lands of his people, where 1,800 Kiowa lived by the 1960s. 2 of Satanta's sons, whose names are not recorded in historical accounts, joined the U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry, a unit once led by George Armstrong Custer, Satanta's captor in 1869. Their service, beginning in the 1880s after Custer's death at Little Bighorn in 1876, was a bitter irony. The 7th Cavalry, with 600 troopers by 1880, was infamous for its role in native dispossession, including the Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890, where 300 Lakota died. Historian David LaVere, in The Texas Indians, suggests the sons' enlistment, likely driven by economic necessity on the reservation, reflected the constrained choices facing Kiowa youth. Their service, under the same banner that subdued their father, underscored the complexities of survival in a colonized world. One of Satanta's sons reportedly gifted their father's sacred sun shield, crafted in 1795, to a commanding officer upon leaving the army. This shield, used in over 100 battles, was a Kiowa relic adorned with eagle feathers and painted with solar motifs, symbolizing protection. Kiowa oral histories, documented by anthropologist Alice Marriott, confirm that such shields, numbering fewer than 20 in the 19th century, were passed down with reverence. The gift, recorded in a 1900 military report from Fort Sill, may have been a gesture of goodwill or a pragmatic exchange. LaVere notes that native soldiers often traded cultural items for favor, a practice born of economic hardship on reservations holding 1,800 Kiowa by 1890. The shield, a testament to Satanta's warrior legacy, was held in a California museum until 2000, when it was repatriated to the Kiowa. The museum, likely the Southwest Museum in Los Angeles, acquired the shield in the early 20th century, displaying it among 5,000 native artifacts. Its return, facilitated by the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990, which mandated the return of 50,000 cultural items by 2000, was a victory for the Kiowa, now numbering 12,000. Robinson emphasizes that the shield's repatriation symbolized cultural resilience, a tangible link to Satanta's era of resistance. It now rests with the Kiowa, a silent witness to their enduring spirit. Satanta's 1871 trial raises enduring questions about justice, challenging whether it was a fair reckoning or a colonial farce. Held in Jacksboro, Texas, before a jury of 12 settlers, the trial convicted Satanta of murder for the Warren Wagon Train attack, which killed 7. Court records, preserved in the Texas State Archives, reveal no Kiowa witnesses were called, and Satanta's defense lacked a translator for his 5 fluent languages. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen, in the Comanche Empire, argues the trial was a tool of conquest designed to criminalize native resistance. The verdict, reached in 2 hours, reflected a broader policy shift, with 200 native leaders tried in civilian courts by 1900, signaling the erosion of tribal sovereignty. Satanta's resistance embodied the Kiowa's broader struggle for sovereignty and identity against relentless settler encroachment. By 1878, the Kiowa's territory, once 100,000 square miles, was reduced to a 2.8 million acre reservation in Oklahoma, home to 1,000 survivors. The bison, 15 million in 1800, numbered fewer than 1,000, starving the Kiowa into submission. Robinson notes that Satanta's raids, killing 200 settlers from 1830 to 1870, were not mere violence but strategic efforts to preserve Kiowa autonomy. His defiance, mirrored by 500 Kiowa warriors in the 1870s, challenged a U.S. expansion that displaced 300,000 native people by 1880, a fight for a way of life. The harsh conditions of Huntsville Penitentiary, marked by hunger and isolation, mirrored the systematic erasure of native cultures. Prisoners, fed 1,200 calories daily of weevil-infested gruel, faced malnutrition. 200 died from disease between 1870 and 1878. Satanta, isolated among 2,000 inmates, endured chain gangs building railroads, a labor that broke 500 prisoners' health in a decade. John Crank, in his study of 19th-century prisons, argues that such conditions were deliberate, designed to crush native spirit. Satanta's cell, 6 by 8 foot space, was a microcosm of the reservations, where 1,800 Kiowa faced similar deprivation, their traditions outlawed by 1880. Satanta's death song, chanted before his fall, was a sacred ritual affirming his unyielding spirit, whether he leapt or was pushed. This Kiowa tradition, sung by warriors facing death, invoked ancestors and the Creator, lasting up to 5 minutes. Ethnomusicologist Victoria Levine describes it as a profound act, tying the singer to their people's cosmology. At Huntsville, where 50 guards enforced silence, the song's resonance was a final act of sovereignty. Robinson suggests that even if murdered, Satanta's chant ensured his spirit departed on his terms, a defiance that echoed across the 500 miles to his homeland. Satanta's legacy remains contested, viewed as a murderer by some and a hero by others, defying simple judgment. Texas newspapers like the Galveston Daily News branded him a savage in 1871, citing 200 settler deaths in Kiowa raids. Yet Kiowa oral histories, preserved by Marriott, hail him as a protector, his raids defending a tribe reduced from 3,000 to 1,000. Hämäläinen argues that Satanta's actions must be seen in context. A leader resisting the genocide of his people, with 300,000 native deaths by disease and violence from 1800 to 1880. His life, spanning 100 battles and a trial, challenges us to weigh justice against survival. The survival of Satanta's shield, like the Kiowa's resilience, invites reflection on what endures amid loss. Crafted in 1795, carried through 100 battles, and repatriated in 2000, the shield embodies a culture that refused to vanish. The Kiowa, now 12,000 strong, maintain traditions despite 1,800 ancestors confined to reservations by 1878. Robinson notes that the shield's return, celebrated by 500 Kiowa at Fort Sill, reaffirmed their identity. Satanta's story, etched in its feathers, asks us to consider the cost of resistance and the strength required to preserve a people's soul against overwhelming odds. The shield of Satanta, a relic of 1795 that endured 100 battles, stands as a testament to the Kiowa's unyielding spirit. Its return in 2000 a quiet triumph over centuries of loss. Satanta's life, from the boundless plains to the confines of Huntsville, reflects a man who defied erasure, whether through raids, oratory, or his final act. His death song, echoing in a prison's halls, was not surrender but a claim to eternity, binding him to a people who, despite dwindling to 1,000 by 1878, now thrive at 12,000. This legacy, woven into the Kiowa's resilience, speaks of a courage that outlasts empires, a reminder of the enduring strength of those who refuse to be forgotten.